shadows bleed, fighting for nothing but a need. The seventh fall is on my knees. Their sighs and secrets cover me.
Welcome. You're listening to Mystic Moon Cafe Radio.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Wendy. I've got Miss June with me and Mr. Jacob as well. So
hi, everyone.
Good evening.
Hello. And the chatter's chatting. Anyway, well, how is everybody this evening? June, have a good day at work?
I did. I really did have a pretty good day today. It was a little challenging, of course, as it usually is, but it was pretty nice. I kind of woke up about 1 o'clock in the morning, and all of a sudden I just started having all these amazing plans that I wanted to do, and I couldn't turn my head off. So, my brain off, basically.
Mhm.
I couldn't take my head off either. But so I got up and I just started making out lists of things that I needed to get done. And I thought, well, after I make these lists, surely I'll go back to sleep. No, I didn't. And I just got more hyper and excited about things that I was going to do. And it was like, oh my God. And then about 6:30 when I, 5:30 I usually get up anyway. So 6:30 is when I started to crash and get really tired. So I was like, oh, this is great. So lots of coffee, everything else later, and I'm doing pretty good, I have to say. But so Jacob, how about you too?
Well, fine and dandy. It was, your usual day job, corporate bland kind of thing. Don't hate boss if you're listening. And, I got no complaints. I've been very excited about the episode tonight just because I'm a major fanboy
Yes, yes.
of
We'll
our
we'll try to
guest.
calm you down sometime. We'll have to say, Jacob, rein it in, rein
I
it in,
know, I
Jacob.
know, I know. I might giggle a lot, so I've got the, that clipping thing on the microphone so I don't like blast everyone's ears out when I go squeal like, oh my
Yes.
God. Yeah.
If you start squealing, we'll be like, um, let's take a break.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, let me
Jacob
find that
posts
intro
stuff.
music here. Yeah, again.
Right. Yep.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, Wendy, how about you? You didn't say how you were.
I'm all right. We had a pretty unpleasant little storm roll through earlier this morning and took out a couple of limbs and things. And
Oh, oh,
the cable's been a little wonky. It's reset itself a few different times today, so I think maybe one of the limbs clipped the line,
oh,
but I
man.
think we'll be okay.
Well, hopefully.
Jacob's running everything, so it won't affect us.
So all of a sudden we hear a kaplump.
Yeah.
We'll know that oh,
Wendy
something
was
happened to Wendy.
disconnected. Yep.
Yeah. Well, if you hear a kaboom and we go down, that's just Rainier popping its top. So that's
Yeah.
nothing to worry about.
Yeah, we're pretty close to the volcano, I mean, I think we are actually, Jacob, aren't we kind of in the safe zone? Isn't it like over 50 miles? No, actually, we're 30 miles, aren't we?
We're a little more than that. So
Oh, more
Tacoma
than
gets
that.
wiped out.
Yeah,
And
Tacoma's
then,
gone.
yeah, and
Sorry.
then Tukwila, which is a southern suburb of Seattle, that will become a little lava pool. But I'm on the other side of that hill, so it'll just be warm and, a little caustic. But otherwise, we should be fine
So
until
if
the
you just
tsunami
make-
hits.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I'm on Mercer Island, so I should be cut off from everything when I-90 goes. And
Yeah, but it's good for the zombie apocalypse.
that's true. I'm on top of a hill, so
Yeah, blow the bridge, and
I'm good.
yeah.
Woohoo!
There you go. You're all
I'm safe.
As the natural disasters keep rolling in,
Yeah.
we've got our plans firmly in place.
Yes, the non-existent global warming.
Oh yeah, we
Wait, I
could
think
talk.
we can go to
that.
jail for saying that.
Yeah,
Oh
we
yes.
We could talk about the end time scenario in New Orleans going on right now. I mean, floods, tornadoes, and a hurricane.
Yeah, all
Wow.
at once, pretty much.
Yeah.
That's a little terrifying, I have to tell you. Yeah. I guess our little light showers for today, I'm like, oh, so nice. This is wonderful. And our temperatures are amazing. It's like my friend in Phoenix says 110, 115 degrees. And it's like, oh, I'm glad I'm right here.
Mhm.
And I'm like, I am sitting here right now with a blanket wrapped around me because I'm so cold. And no air conditioning. So it's like pretty amazing.
Ooh.
Pretty amazing, I have to say. That's why I love Seattle.
Ditto.
But-
The upstairs people keep it cool enough upstairs, and there's something. The raccoons did some damage to a whole bunch of ductwork in the attic.
What?
So all of the cold, yeah, we had critters in the systems,
Oh, man.
and we did catch them and release them over on the other side of the river, but there was something gone on, but the air conditioning blows so hard down here that it's about 60 to 62 degrees most of
Oh,
the time.
nice.
It's
Wow.
colder now in the middle of summer than it was all winter long.
Great. So yes,
I got my
Wendy
socks
gets-
and my
yes.
fuzzy slippers and sweater.
Wendy gets frostbite in
Yep.
the in the basement.
Mhm.
Oh my gosh. Oh, that's
Well, better than being hot.
yeah, exactly.
True.
I just cannot stand the heat.
Nope.
Can't stand the
I'm-
heat or the cold. So really, really.
Perpetual spring or fall.
Yes, exactly. That's why I love Seattle,
Yep.
Hardly ever gets below 30 degrees and hardly, well, a lot of times it does not get above, I would say 80. Wouldn't you
Mm.
say? I mean, most of the time.
Yeah, we've
We've
got the
had a few
couple of
days,
weeks
yeah.
where it
Yeah, at
gets
least
into the 90s, but usually it's upper 70s, so can't
exactly.
loves
I
me
can't,
that.
I'm not complaining at all. Even if we haven't had hardly any warm days at all. It's been kind of a chilly summer so far.
Yeah, we're still in May.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, anyway, We would just talk about this lovely weather all day long.
But we got business to get to.
Yes, we do.
We do.
This is exciting.
Jacob, would you like to introduce our guest?
I would love to. I'm a huge fan. Okay.
Okay.
Are you ready, folks? I'm going to kick into radio announcer voice for this one, all right?
You go right ahead, Jacob.
So, author, investigator, and artist Linda Godfrey is the author of 18 books on strange creatures, phenomena, and people. She's a frequent guest on national TV and radio shows, including Monster Quest, Seasons 1 and 4, Fox News Red Eye, Lost Tapes, Monsters and Mysteries, Sean Hannity's America, Inside Edition, Coast to Coast AM, Wisconsin Public Radio, and The Jenny McCarthy Show. She recently appeared on Travel Channel's In Search of Monsters, as well as Legend Hunter for The Beast of Bray Road and Small Town Monsters, also focusing on The Beast of Bray Road. She lives in the Kettle Moraine area of southeastern Wisconsin with her husband and her dog, Grendel. Linda has a new book coming out on July 16th, I Know What I Saw, which will be the topic of conversation this evening. And with that, Linda S. Godfrey, I'm a huge fanboy. Would you please come on?
Hi, welcome, Linda.
Hello. So nice to talk with you all. And fanboys are great. Fangirls are good. Fan dogs.
Awesome.
Any fans are wonderful to me, and I appreciate anyone who pays even a penny for one of my books. It's still a miracle to me.
They're all
actually
fabulous.
happens.
Everyone buy 6 copies each. Give them as Christmas gifts. I'm serious.
Pass them out at work and things.
Oh, I forgot to mention that Linda has a Facebook group, Unknown Creature Spot, for all these sorts of creature and cryptid sightings. So if you're on Facebook, go find that group and sign up as well.
Yeah, and
fun.
there has to be somebody there to kind of sign you in. It's a closed group, but we just, don't want scammers coming in. So we just take a little bit of precaution. But they can also go to, I have a blog, lindagodfrey.com, and there's also my own Facebook pages. I have Linda Godfrey and Linda, the one that's supposed to be my author pages is Linda S. as in Susan Godfrey.
Okay.
So there's a wide range.
I will drop those in the chat for the fans.
Thank you, Jacob.
No problem.
And by the way, I'm so glad to hear that all of you are in the safe zone from the next impending volcano. I would not want to see
Thank you very much.
Lava.
Well,
Yes.
I
Maybe
will.
you're-
I was going to say.
That's
Go
really,
ahead, Linda.
I was just going to say that I'm hoping that you'll be the shepherds of the Bigfoot and the man-wolves that also flee to the safe zones when that happens.
Yes, it's like,
Thank you
come
very
this way, come this way.
But I will say, once Tacoma gets inundated with the, I forgot what they call those protoplasmic mud flows, but the bat squatch might be flying out.
There you go. Yep, that was the original bat squatch terminology. Birthplace, I guess you would call it. I still think that is one of the best cryptid names anywhere that anybody has. Bat squatch. It's perfect.
Yes, but later on the show, when we get into the discussion of, it deals with the Chilean, the chapter with the Chilean cave creatures. When we get to that one, you've got some short squatch. I'm going to be all over that one.
Oh, yeah, it's in the small beings chapter.
Yes.
Well, Linda, Wendy here. I was wondering how you feel about being the catalyst for the Legend of the Beast of Bray Road.
Well, it's one of those things that has just sort of come along without real effort. I mean, when it happened, I was just writing a story that I thought would be some local interest and be gone in a couple of weeks. Never did I dream that it would go on any length of time after that. And then 10 years later, I'm sitting there at the newspaper office thinking, I'm still getting letters and phone calls. That was probably about the year 2000, just before everybody really had their own Facebook pages. I'm not even sure Facebook was a thing then quite yet. But it seemed to me very odd at the time, and I thought, well, I know what I'll do, because I was actually just wondering how long it was going to keep up, and people were going to be contacting me. And I even tried to pawn off all my notes and things on the local library, and they just came back and gave it back to me and said, well, we can't handle all these calls. So there I was, kind of stuck with it again. And I thought, well, I know what I'll do. I'll write a book. I had already wanted to write a book, and I had written another book about a different topic already as well. So I thought, I'll put it in a book where it's all together. People can go to this book. They can read the whole thing. They can see what happened. They can, learn what the witnesses said and what other sorts of things and theories had sprung up by that time. It was, updated. So I thought that would be the ending. And really, that book was just truly the beginning. It just went, the whole thing seemed to go not viral because there was no really going viral in those days.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a big hoo-ha about it. I don't know what kind of word that is. It's just what I used to say that.
It's a very Wisconsin word, yes.
It is, exactly.
I understand you.
But there hadn't been such a big fuss about it until that book came out, and then the book just started it again. And every time, that would happen, then more people would write, and I think, well, I have to let these things be known, and this cements that theory, and that disproves that, and so I'd write another book, and I just sort of kind of drifted along on this, pelt of werewolf pile. I was going to say pelts, but it didn't come out quite right. On the pile of werewolf pelts does not sound very appetizing either.
Yes.
It was like there was some sort of. I was thinking of something feathery, light, and buoyant that was bearing me along, and that was what came to mind. But and anyway, I don't think that they're werewolves that you could get a pelt from anyway. I believe there's something a little bit different, and they're not real werewolves. That's my other big thought, is that they're not like what the people of France experienced back in medieval times when hundreds of people were being killed by these things, and they had actual animals that were also captured and killed, and so they had material proof. They had terrible damages, and they had creatures that really weren't like what contemporary reports were saying at all.
Mm-hmm.
So that, and then because I was kind of getting out there for these strange subjects, I also was blessed and fortunate enough to be asked to co-write the Weird Wisconsin book for Barnes and Noble, and then to write the Weird Michigan book for Barnes and Noble, and then sequels to those. That kind of just set me off in the different directions. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I know a lot of people. There was some debate about the Beast of Bray Road, that a lot of people thought it was actually Bigfoot, and then this was just kind of another category, I guess you'd say, for Bigfoot. And I guess I didn't realize it was such a I guess you'd say a big thing about it. There's so many people have been arguing about it, that some people think it was the Wolfman, some people think it's Bigfoot, and
It's a lot of controversy. Yeah, and especially when it first started coming out, it really was quite, people in the Bigfoot camp were not willing to accept it very well, and they were calling it the snouted Bigfoot.
Oh,
and that would be Bigfoot. It didn't make any sense to me, because one was clearly a primate, the other one was clearly a canine, and they're built really differently. They just are. Primates, the Bigfoot, humans, we walk flat-footed, and where canines walk on their toe pads. Mm-hmm. And people say, well, their legs were turned backwards when they were describing the canines, and really what they were saying was that the part, the hock, or what we would call the heel in the human leg and foot, we have our heel touching the ground, and something that walks on its toe pads has its heel up above the ground. And so you're seeing what we would think of as the heel and believing that should be the knee. The knee should be pointing forward the other direction, and it isn't. We're just seeing the heel and not realizing it. So most people have not thought through this whole thing of anatomy. So when they see that jutting heel bone or hock pointing backwards to them, then I know they're just describing what they saw, without trying to go look things up or anything else. They're just telling me plain and truthfully. And also, the Bigfoots don't have tails. Dogman's not always seen with one, but quite a bit. Most people will report that there's kind of a brushy tail, and furry all over, and they have the long snouts and the pointy ears on top of their heads.
Right.
On Bigfoot, you very seldom see an ear unless the hair is kind of like, I had one really great description of one where there was one crossing a river, kind of swimming across a river to this man who was on the other side of it, and he said the hair parted because it was wet, and he could see there was a flat human-like but pointed ear on the side of the head. Normally, it's just covered by the fur, and it isn't very often that people get to see that. But this was an exceptionally good sighting. It's in the American Monsters book, excuse me. And so that was an interesting part of the description that they seem to be overlooking. And then my final analysis was, well, let's say that you went to Africa and that you were looking for chimpanzees, and then you saw a hyena, which you didn't know existed, and you said, well, that must be a snouted chimpanzee.
Right.
Yeah.
Very much.
I was going to say, in that regard, though, they probably would think a baboon was a snouted chimpanzee.
I have had those proposed to me separately, except baboons really don't. I mean, they'll sit up on their haunches, quite straight, but they really are even more of a quadruped, and they're not even primates. They're monkeys, basically, because they have tails, and they're just in kind of a different family. But their heads do look somewhat canine until you really look at them and examine them closely next to a dog's or a wolf's. There are quite a bit of differences, but and their behavior is really different. And we have, to my knowledge, zero baboon population in the United States.
Yeah.
That's maybe a few zoos. I'm not sure. They have to be a very well-equipped zoo to have a baboon because they're very clever and big and strong.
I don't know if they have those in Kansas City or not.
Baboons?
The Kansas City Zoo. Yeah.
In the zoo?
In the Great Ape House, or however that was called.
I think Milwaukee does. Here. And I know there are zoos that have them, but just a population that you might run into if you're running around at night anywhere in the United States, you're just probably not going to see a baboon.
Yeah, hopefully not.
Kangaroos, maybe. They do get out.
Yeah, with baboons, though, they like very large. I don't know if you call them pods or colonies. Actually, it's called an army of baboons, and they're very migratory, so they probably wouldn't do well in the enclosures of a zoo. It would probably drive them insane because they're very migratory, like wolves.
Right. It would be nuts. It would drive them nuts, I agree. The mandrill is a little bit different, maybe, but it's so bizarrely colored that you'd notice that right away. So there are possibilities, but not the snouted Bigfoot, I'm afraid.
It's really interesting. That too. I mean, it's like finding prints. It would definitely be large canine prints, if there was something like that, unless Bigfoot is taking up ballet and walking on his, Sorry.
Yeah. Well,
I won't say that.
I would say the other thing is it was described as eating meat, and a lot of primates, while omnivores, they tend to eat vegetation much more, which in that part of Wisconsin, there's a lot of vegetation. There
is, and Bigfoots have been seen gathering roots of cattail plants and then stacking them kind of in a neat pile and then taking the pile home to their wherever cave or whatever it is that they live in. And they also are known to pick berries, much like bears do, but they seem very fond of both roadkill and especially of deer. People have frequently seen them chasing deer, chasing rabbits, taking away a large piece of roadkill. And that actually, I sometimes think that perhaps that was what inspired the first bipedal canines. Perhaps I really think that the Bigfoot was mostly on the West Coast, out by you, and maybe up into Canada, maybe came down into New York State. We don't have a lot of places where Bigfoot was put into the Native American totems out here. But you see those, I'm sure you're well aware of all the West Coast evidence of that. but that when the wolves or what dog wolves or whatever were here at the time saw that they may have tried to imitate it, or maybe they felt like they were defending themselves better if they stood up against it. Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
I call that model the indigenous dog man, and I think I had that right in this book. Yeah, because it just seemed like there might be, especially in the prairie state areas and around the Great Lakes, places like that where it would be very advantageous for animals with larger paws that were able to, and maybe it's just some had mutated them and found they had this big advantage, and of course, reproduce more of themselves.
Mm-hmm. Well,
And then were able to stand up and carry things in their upper forearms, which gave them different muscles,
mm-hmm.
and not have to go on 4 feet across a muddy, watery place that they didn't want to. They could go on their hind legs. So there may have been many rewards for that.
Yeah, so the one thing that I always thought was curious when we're talking about either with the canids or with Bigfoot, especially in the upper Midwest, the Great Lakes region, is there's so much fish available in shallow rivers and streams that you would think, looking at, say, a black bear or other bear, they would just go fishing for like muskie and pike, and simply because it was so abundant.
Mm-hmm.
But you never really hear about fishing from Bigfoot or many other creatures other than like a raccoon or a bear.
Yeah, that is interesting. I have personal knowledge of a couple of close friends who have seen Bigfoot sort of like grabbing for fish from the shoals of Michigan Lake, for one,
mm-hmm.
where it was a very good fishing place. And in fact, the person took me out there in a rowboat to the exact spot where he saw Bigfoot leaning over and acting like it was trying to get things out of the water.
Mm-hmm.
You could just see where it would be a perfect place for them to get nutrition, and that's what he seemed to be doing. And then there was also I visited. There's a woman in Maine who had sort of a habituation with Bigfoot for quite a bit of her life, and she said this was a lake, as I said, in Maine, that was quite deep in the center and had shallows, and so there were clams all around it. And she said when they were in season, this Bigfoot and several of them would come and sit down on the edge of the water and just kind of plant themselves there in the mud and just crack open using their knuckles and their bare hands clam after clam after clam and just eat what was in it and discard the shell. And there'd be big, shell middens left over from him. Can you imagine how many of those things a Bigfoot could put away?
Yeah, that's the truth.
It's so true.
Yeah, in one sitting. So
I mean, so the one thing that would concern me about Bigfoot and other creatures with the invasive species, like let's just take, so I grew up on Lake Superior. Mm-hmm. We have zebra mussels. Zebra mussels, not good for food. They choke off a lot of the native clams that would be available. And now we have the Asian carp, which if you don't know about the Asian carp, it will jump on your boat and attack you and eat everything in sight.
You're kidding.
Seriously.
That's a nightmare.
Yeah.
They're huge, and they just hurtle through the air like circus performers and land on people's boats.
Yeah.
I've seen videos, and they're not hoaxes. I mean, that's what they do.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm just thinking you have an animal, even though Bigfoot is probably a pretty smart critter, right? But, and with some of the other creatures, but they're looking at these potential food sources. They're not like the things they're used to eating. It makes me think we would have a starvation effect on these cryptids and creatures. And I mean, to me, that's kind of alarming that we allow so much of these invasive species.
Yeah, it's very sad because they kill off the good things, and yeah, there's a lot being learned about forests and eco-management right now. I know with the known animals that can sort of just transit over into the same thing that we're talking about. For instance, take the mountain lions, which are heading. It's well known that they're heading eastward, and they had been almost exterminated in the continental U.S., except a few were driven down into the areas of Arizona, southern Texas, that sort of kind of drier desert place. And they have to, every male cougar needs about 30 square miles, and they have to go out in search of 30 square miles and a female in order to achieve their life goal, which is making more baby cougars. And it sort of drives them. And so they've been coming eastward. And the thing is, the big argument is, should they be allowed to be shot or protected or whatever? And the thing is, it's so counterintuitive. You would think that if they went and shot the larger animals, which is what normally happens because the hunters want the trophy size, right? So they choose the older, larger cougars, but unfortunately they're also choosing the wiser ones, the ones that know how to, they know how to hunt and provide for themselves and their families, and they know how to stay away from humans. They know what guns are. And so what happens then is the efficient deer killers, because they're really good at taking out the sick and the deformed and the weak ones. And when that happens, the deer herds proliferate and get bigger and start eating all the plants they're not supposed to eat. And then the ecosystem gets poorer because all these good plants are gone, and then the deer have to look for other things. And it's just kind of, you would think, well, if the more big ones they shoot, the less there will be, but it's the opposite way. And so then things just go downhill quickly from that.
Well, that's like when they reintroduced the wolves it was at Yellowstone, where they reintroduced the wolves in there, and now the wolves it's a nice big pack now, and it's amazing. They did a study of the whole thing of how many things that changed with the ecosystem, and it was incredible. It's like the water was more abundant. I mean, it was just so many little changes, and because the deer were being more controlled, so there was more vegetation. It was just this incredible effect.
Yeah, very similar. Very similar.
It's like, wow, it's like people need to really look at that.
They do, and yet, then you see the other side, because in Wisconsin, we have wolves which are not considered. They're considered an endangered species. So legally, you can't hunt them, you can't shoot them, even if they're taking some of your livestock. It has to be to protect you, or a human, or you can't shoot them. And so we opened the newspaper yesterday, and in kind of central Wisconsin, there was a wolf pack that killed 30 sheep.
No.
Or wait, I take that back. I think they killed 12 sheep, and then there was one further up north that killed 30 or 40 sheep.
Oh, no.
So then the state has to pay reparations.
Right.
Everybody is, talking about it on both sides, but we never quite come to any consensus.
Yeah, that's true. And I think in northern Wisconsin, so I grew up with wolves as a threat, and also black bears. But to me, it seems like the wolves are learning to adapt and deal with humans, because for the longest time, wolves were very skittish around people, and you didn't really get much crossover. Not so much now. So it makes me think that there might be hybridization. Let's just look at the northeastern brown coyote in upstate New York, which is dog, coyote, and wolf, and it has all the best characteristics of the different species. So it makes me think, wolves just aren't as afraid anymore.
Yeah.
No, I don't think
Which is a little scary.
Yeah.
Well, and in Hillsborough, it's remarkable because, well, you know what that place looks like. It looks like somewhere in Colorado, but with more vegetation, with the rocky outcliffs and all the great the green forests, the deep valleys. It's beautiful. Rivers going through it. People have no idea that there are parts of Wisconsin that look like this, and so they've been seeing mountain lions over the past a few in the 1930s, and then really kind of starting in earnest around the the 50s and the 60s. And at least 150 reports have been made just to one man who's been keeping track. He's a former newspaper writer and editor, born and raised in Hillsborough. And people started calling him and telling him, and he was very good about recording these things and getting it all down. And here's the thing, 150 cougar-like creatures in several decades within an 18-mile radius of Hillsborough, Wisconsin, is mind-blowing. Mm-hmm. And even more so is the fact that over half of them were black fur, and which is not supposed to exist. You know, there's not supposed to be a black or melanistic mountain lion. So it's possible that they're hybrids with something else, you know. But even so, it's quite unusual. And the other thing is that people will make reports of creatures that these animals are coming right up to their backyards, to their back doors. The latest one we had was in this March, and a very large black-furred, I'm going to say panther for lack of a better word, they're not really panthers either, but a black panther-like creature, a large one, walked through this guy's yard in the city limits of Hillsborough and just kept going. And his next-door neighbor had 2 sightings of them over the past several years. So it's a real thing, and they're being snubbed and ignored by the DNR and by other wildlife officials.
Yes. I was just watching that today about all these witnesses that are coming forward and saying, you know, we've got some black panthers walking around in you know, the woods behind our houses, and people are like, oh, you're full of crap, and these people are really credible, and you know, saying, you'll be sorry.
Exactly.
Yeah, so for our listeners that aren't familiar with it, the geography is unique to the area. Back during the last glaciation or ice age, there was a section of Wisconsin and the upper Midwest, there's parts of Minnesota, Iowa, and a little bit in Illinois where the glaciers missed. And so these bluffs, this bluff area you see is essentially where the glacial meltwaters flowed through is a giant lake, and the tops of the sandstone cliffs and bluffs, these were the islands in the middle of the glacial lake, Lake Wisconsin it was called. So that explains the geography. It's kind of like a mini Grand Canyon. It's gorgeous. La Crosse is gorgeous.
Yeah, it's astounding. I remember, and see, both my grandmothers are from, well, one lived in Hillsborough and the other one lived in Wilton, maybe 7-8 miles away from there. And so I had a lot of childhood vacations either there or up in Price County, up in northern Wisconsin, close to, you know, where you grew up. So it's just, there's no place like it. And I know one book I read called it like Candyland for cougars, just from the way that it is. But I don't think I mentioned my son and I and my husband formed a mini production company, and we're making a film, a documentary film on these cougars around the Hillsborough area. And there's even a mountain, a small mountain that's known as Wildcat Mountain. And so this is called, we call it the Return to Wildcat Mountain. If you go to, you can look it up on Facebook, or you can go to YouTube and just put in Return to Wildcat Mountain, and there's a 2.5-minute trailer on it. But again, you'll see we have so many great witnesses. There's even one woman who lives there now, but some years ago she was part of the Florida Panther program, in which they were the cougars in Florida were dying out. They just didn't have good conditions. They were being shot. They were in great danger of disappearing, and so they brought in all these big He-Man cougars from Texas. I think one article described them as what Rocky in one of his movies. I can't remember. Sylvester Stallone in one of his movies. I can't remember which one. And so these were then bred with the other ones, and they pretty much helped bring back that panther troop that they originally had. And it's just amazing how these animals have this desire to come back to where it's as if they knew that their ancestors once roamed all over the Western Hemisphere, which is true. So did the wolves, you know, and they all seem to have this instinctual urge to go back home, wherever it was that their ancestors roamed, which is everywhere. And just no matter what we humans do, they find a way around it. If there isn't enough good plant food, they'll go into our garbage cans and take what they can.
Mm-hmm.
Bears too, but yeah, it's something that is getting to be more and more noticeable, and we're going to have to come to terms with it.
Yeah, so the big thing, and believe me, I'm pro Cougar, don't get me wrong, but what always, and having lived there as a kid, we knew about, the Cougars.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that I never really got is Wisconsin winters are really, really harsh and really, really long. You would think there would be some kind of migration, but where would they go? Because there's nowhere else around the area until probably you get down to the Ozarks that is anything like the driftless area. So how do they persist unless they're holing up in the sandstone caves and, raiding some farms?
Well, some of them are, no doubt. But most of the ones that they've been able to track with collars, and then they just go back and look at the DNA, have come from the region of the Black Hills in the Dakotas.
Okay.
And they come down through Minnesota and cross. Some of them somehow cross the Wisconsin River. Others go farther south and go around it, and then up into Wisconsin. So there are different routes, but if you look at just a regular map, you see all the roads, you see all the markings of the city, and it looks to you like there's no place a cougar could go. But if you look at well, let's just say a map that a drone made, an overhead map where you see all the tree canopies and the forests and everything, and the rivers, and the houses become really subordinate to that. And you see that there is lots of cover, and that these animals, the ones that they've been able to track, follow sort of the same path. There was one back in, let's see, it would have been around 2008, I believe. It was called the Milton Cougar. I actually grew up in Milton, which is another small town near where I live now, not that far from the Kettle Moraine. And this cougar, they identified it was leaving droppings along the way, and enough people were finding footprints and turning in those droppings that they sort of tracked it. That is the one that got all the way down, went west of Milwaukee, moved like through the Kettle Moraine area, right almost to where my husband and I were living at the time, and then followed the lake line of Lake Michigan until it got to Chicago. And then rather than branching out, it was finding enough greenery, parks and golf courses and that kind of thing that it kept going, and finally surfaced in a suburb or outlying town of Chicago, where it emerged in an alley and had to be shot because it was so bewildered, didn't know how to get out of there, and people were afraid of it. There's another one called the Connecticut cougar that took several years and went all the way to Connecticut, made almost the same journey.
Wow.
So they're finding their escape routes, and it's not as hard as one might think.
Mm-mm. So the other thing, since we were on the subject of critters you don't expect showing up in Chicagoland, I don't know if you saw the news recently, but they found alligators in a lake near Chicago.
Humboldt Park?
Yeah, you read it?
Not the whole thing, but yeah, I've been talking with someone about it.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting, simply because after I grew up in Wisconsin, I had moved to Chicago to go to school, and I stayed there for a long time. But, Chicago for the longest time had winters, like the upper Midwest you expect. But
right.
Things have changed, and it doesn't get that bad anymore in the winter. So I wouldn't be surprised with all that, the upper Midwest, it's loaded with fresh water. Gators like fresh water. And Linda, you had written about Wisconsin gators before. I think it was in Monsters of Wisconsin. Do you see a trend with large reptiles making it to the upper Midwest?
Well, they seem to be reported more often. I'll say that. I know there was one reported in Janesville quite a few years ago. And, there are several different ways. I mean, people sometimes get them for pets or bring them back from Florida
Mhm.
for a joke. I mean, gators, you can have 10 gators crawling around on your sidewalk at any given moment from some people I know if you're in the right places. Um, and they do sometimes find sewers. My husband happens to be a civil engineer who specializes in water treatment and waste control. And um, they can get into sewers and come out in strange places, as well as large snakes. And it's just this will to find survivable places.
Wow.
Um, it's it's very kind of mind blowing when you think what those things go through. They're just kind of blindly foraging wherever they see the next good pile of something to eat, and and I really think that may be changing our climates, our ecosystems, just as well as anything else, because they also affect where farmers, if your sheep are getting killed continually, you're going to move them to a different place, you're going to add some construction, you're going to change the landscape in some way to be in your favor, and you multiply that over many farms, and the effects could be quite great.
That's true. Well, that's the thing about adapting too. It's like so a lot of these reptiles, if they have babies when it's warm and the babies are born and all of a sudden they start to adapt with the colder weather and then they have, you never know. It's like just adapting and changing with the climate they're in.
Right, exactly.
So the alligators in the New York sewers, I remember that was a really big thing back then, Maybe it has a little
Oh
maybe it
yeah,
was a little true.
oh yeah, definitely.
Like Chicago now.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And it'll be interesting to see if they get any more of
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Then there's a
Was it
sort.
just a alien?
Well, they can be an anomaly too. Like, somebody
Right,
bought one at
Hmm.
a pet store, flushed it
exactly.
or whatever, and
Exactly. It's like I lived.
it
Yeah,
thrived.
Yes.
yep.
Ew.
All of a
Ooh,
sudden,
yeah,
the
that would be
Chihuahuas
interesting.
have gone missing.
Yes,
And
exactly.
that happens. I mean, when
Yep.
there are either large numbers of any sort of I can't remember if we were talking off air earlier, but my neighbor that had a coyote come up in their backyard, right next to my backyard, and she said they'd been seeing them and hearing weird noises in the green space. They thought maybe there were several other things, but people's small dogs at that time were going missing,
Mm.
and cats.
Sure.
Aw.
Yeah, so that's what happens. In fact, I'll tell you a story that is a little bit humor on the humorous side that happened maybe a decade or two ago in southern Illinois, kind of in the center of the Wisconsin-Illinois border. And there were these two women who had a cat that they lived in a house right near that border town, and they had let it out. Usually, they let it out to go prowl for an hour or two every night before they went to bed. And all of a sudden, they heard their cat just yowling, and they ran to the patio door, the kitchen patio door, flipped on the light, and standing right there with a. Have you ever seen those guilty dog looks? When your dog knows it did something bad.
Mhm.
There
Know
was
it well.
like there was a 6 foot tall dog-like creature standing there in their patio light with their cat in its mouth.
Oh
Oh
no.
no.
And I guarantee you, these two ladies were not going to make up a story like this. They were shocked, and they were screaming, and they had the light on, and all in all, it was enough to shock him that he opened his mouth and dropped the cat. The cat just rocketed
Oh
away,
wow.
and he turned around and left.
Well,
Hmm.
now, is it possible that he was just returning a wayward fur kid back to these ladies?
It's like here we go.
Oh,
I,
by the way,
I tend to doubt it. Um,
yeah.
you never know, but it is true that in areas where these things are seen, um, there usually is small animal depredation. And in fact, I heard from, I had a report from another man who lived in a mobile home park not too far from Bray Road itself. And he said that nobody could understand it, but for the longest time, almost all the cats were gone missing out of that mobile home park.
Oh
And
wow.
then they became aware, somebody clued them in, of what what mammals were nearby them, and happened to be the Beast of Bray Road, if you want to call it that, or an example of something very similar.
Um,
I can tell you're not
sorry.
digesting
Yeah,
that.
it stopped. Yeah, my my head went, see ya.
Yeah, it's a lot to observe, and it's very complex.
Sorry.
It's very complex because you've got this interplay of animals that always were here. They've been pushed around to other parts of the country. They're trying to come back, and then you've also got occasionally some things that don't sound like earthly natural animals. For instance, the ones that are usually seen running alongside the road. I'm talking about the unknown upright canines. Your quote unquote normal unknown upright canines are doing something that isn't supernatural. Running on the hind legs is something any mammal can accomplish if it has impaired front paws, or if it's been trained or motivated in some way to do it. They can. But what people notice about these animals is this uncanny sense that it's just as interested in them in a personal way as they are in it. And they'll have sort of an epic stare down with it. And they'll feel during this that they'll get the idea. It's like it puts an idea in their head, not words in English, but they'll get the idea that it's trying to tell them that it's better than them, or that it could jump on their car if it wanted to, and occasionally that has happened, or it could get them if they go and tell people about it.
Wow.
And that's when people get scared, when they feel like they're
being
getting
threatened.
they're getting a message, and I'm not even so sure that it's the threat itself, other than that they don't know
Fear
what
of the
this is.
unknown.
Fear of the unknown, precisely. They don't know exactly what this is. They don't know if it could do these things. They don't understand why it's doing these things, because, say you're a hunter. This actually has happened to my husband, where he's out hunting in the woods, waiting for the perfect deer to come by. And he was in his tree stand once, and a bear came, walked about like 20 feet away from him, never looked up, never did anything. But it certainly didn't stop and stare him in the eyes and think, I am bear, I could get you from the tree. There was nothing like that. And you would consider it a very unusual story if you hunted, or somebody you knew hunted and came back and said, yeah, I saw this bear and I felt like he was trying to tell me he climbed the tree. You'd go do 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 do.
Yeah, that's true. Was that is like the Warnerville dog woman story?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just thinking that with the superior intelligence.
Yeah. So, in that regard, Linda, I mean, that was one of my favorite stories that you had in I Know What You Saw, or I Know What I Saw, sorry, which comes out on July 16th, people. You can pre order on Amazon. That's the plug.
I already did.
Okay.
I already pre-ordered.
Okay. Ditto. So what was interesting with that one is that, like, the whole chapter is focused around dog women, which you don't really hear about the female counterparts of canids.
Never do. And
Yeah.
as soon as Jacob had brought that up, about not hearing about, female canids, it's just like, it's so true. You always hear about men changing, or even in the movies, all the movies, it's always men,
Right.
and male werewolves. So
And I hate to mention it, but also female investigators, very, very few of them.
Oh, good point. Very good point.
Yeah.
Very, very, very good point. Yeah. But my question around that one is, because you do mention multiple dog women through chapter 2, which is called A Meat Hook and a Dog Woman. But in the case of
my favorite chapter title ever.
it was amazing. But my question with that one is, this specific dog woman seemed to be aggressive. And because you had interviewed the 3 teenagers and they talked about the story from 72, but this had persisted throughout that area of Pennsylvania. So I really have 2 questions is, how does a story like this, which, you got a lot of people who get threatened by this, I don't know if I want to call it a cryptid. I guess that would be appropriate. But how does a story like this not reach prominence? And also the other thing is, in general, why would female canids not be so aggressive?
Yeah, it's hard to answer both of those questions because you have to try and sort out fact. The fact was that these three guys were riding in a car and looked up on this rock-faced wall, vertical wall, that was kind of casing in one side of the road. This was on a hill, and on the top of the hill was this old, beautiful resort that had become a sanatorium, and then became finally abandoned. And they used to use kind of an opening or a hole built into this rock wall for their meat storage. They would put a big hunk of ice because it was built before they had refrigerators, and that's how people kept their meat cold. And so, of course, you had to have meat hooks inside the chamber to hold that meat up off the floor. And then there used to be a door on it, but the door is long gone. So these guys had heard about something vague about a dog lady. It was kind of on their minds, and they went out. They'd been out a couple of times before. And this time, they pulled up in front of where that meat hook chamber was and looked up, and lo and behold, there was an upright canine. Now, they don't describe how they knew that it was a dog woman. They just presumed that because there was the legend about the dog woman, and it was placed where they were, that it must be this dog woman. So they're just kind of going on faith there at that point. And then it behaves in an aggressive way. Maybe, you can always surmise that it had its territory. Maybe it had some pups if it was the dog woman. You don't really know for sure. But if you read the whole thing, you can see that I did sort of map out, because I when I'm puzzled by something, I like to open a map. I still prefer the big old atlases for my first look, and just kind of pin everything is, and then connections often start to become apparent. And I noticed that we had the Mobile dog lady,
Yep.
right at that same time frame, and that they weren't all that far away in distance, and that this one did look like a female and a humanoid dog, upright dog, because they said she had a somewhat human-like pretty face, and that she had hair and just impressed everybody strongly as a female. So my thought, my conjecture is that perhaps this traveled word of mouth via high school students from one to the other over these, several years in the gaps of the sightings. And because it was always mentioning a dog lady when these strange canines came up, that's just what people assumed that it was.
Yeah, but you had posted the theory that it could be a female Bigfoot simply because of the face and because the face, it wasn't muzzled.
That's true. It did seem more humanoid, and so that is another possibility. It's hard to say. You would have had to see it from the back and see if there was a tail or something, because Bigfoot wouldn't have a tail. There would be a few other markers, but the descriptions were, especially for the Mobile one, kind of, how can I put this? I don't want to say sketchy, because people seemed to be frightened out of their minds by it when they saw it. They didn't offer the same amount of detail. But you can't always be sure that just because something resembles another thing, that you're actually seeing both are the same thing.
Correct, yeah.
So it's a little hard to figure out. And my whole purpose in writing this book, if you notice, there's a subtitle, kind of a never-ending subtitle, that goes Modern Day Encounters with Monsters of New Urban Legend and Ancient Lore.
Yes.
And my original assignment was to write a book that took this modern legendary, which there's not a lot of real different modern legendary. I'm mostly talking about things like Men in Black, the stick man, stick people, Slenderman, that sort of thing. And
I love the Hat Man.
The Hat Man is another one. They really are not like the traditional part animal, part human sorts of monsters. Killer clowns is another one that's There's no animalistic part. It's just a, rotten human, or scary at the very least, human. So I thought, well, if I took each one of these and kind of visualized it as a yarn ball where all the pieces of yarn have been tied together and then rolled up into a ball, I should be able to just take that, lay it out straight, and see just how everything went and untangle it with a now, a middle, and a long ago. And the thing was, when I started laying these things out straight and seeing where they were and where they went and what really happened, the tangles just got worse. There'd be places where there was a wrong color put with another color, or they were snipped in two and I had to pull it out and start over. That's how it felt, just in my own analogy, because things didn't always level out as you expected.
Mm-hmm.
But most of these creatures, other than the ones of the electronic age, going back to, millennia, back to Sumeria, to the very earliest civilizations, had pretty much the same monster creatures. They had the giant flapping birds, big enough to carry away a man.
Right.
Thunderbirds.
Yeah, we had the Thunderbirds with the Native Americans, the Rock with the Persian Iranians.
Mm-hmm.
You had back in Sumeria, you had the Adventures of Enkidu, and what was the other guy's name? And one of them was like a big, hairy, half human, half animal type of creature. And that was way back in Sumeria, and it reminds anybody who looks at it and reads about it for a long time, reminds them of Bigfoot. It was a little more civilized than Bigfoot, but you go in and you go forward into some of the Egyptian ones. You've got Anubis, the jackal-headed god of death, all slick black fur and the pointy ears on top of the head, the long muzzle.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And people do report things. I have a number of reports where people say it was black furred and it reminded me of that Egyptian Anubis. Sometimes if people are reporting one in their bedroom, I call them the bedroom invaders. Other people have called them that too. And something is inside your bedroom at night that didn't go through the door to get it. In that case, you're dealing with something phantom and different. Usually those have red eyes instead of the usual green, yellow eye shine. And so you start realizing then there are permutations of these things. And that's where it gets kind of confusing. Are they seeing a natural animal? Are they seeing some sort of spirit energy imitating or mimicking the natural animal that's doing that thing? Are they inspiring the natural animal to walk on hind legs like a human? How is the connection done? What relates to what?
Yeah.
And that's tough. And I don't claim that I've solved all these. Just I've put them forward, and I'm sure there will be people trying to figure them out.
Yeah, I was going to say one of the chapters I found really interesting was chapter 3, which is those deer people. And you talk about the mule deer woman as well as deer people. And for one thing, I didn't know mule deer anything could be lethal. But you talk about how the eyes glow differently than other animals. They're white, and sometimes they're white with a green hue around them. But my question with those, and thank you for bringing forward deer people, because I never really thought about them.
Right, I haven't either.
I hadn't. But you had interviewed a lot of Native Americans, specifically, I think it was the Lakota Sioux, especially with the mule deer woman. And is there something about with Native Americans being able to perceive these creatures more accurately than other ethnicities?
Well, I think it certainly may be that partly that they're more aware. They're looking through these things. They have some, let me pun badly, skinwalker in the game because they live there. And if they don't follow the known rules for dealing with these creatures, they believe their families could suffer repercussions. So they're very careful to learn about these, to observe advice given by elders, and which is basically that if you see them, you don't mess around with them. You try to make yourself inconspicuous to them.
Right.
You don't want to draw their attention. And so when you're driving along and you see this woman on the side of the road. One of the guys wanted to stop and offer her a ride, and the other guy said, if she's out here walking by herself at 2 a.m., she doesn't need our help. was the reply. And so it does make you wonder, and it's very, very much very like the UK idea of the water horse, which is something that it looks like a beautiful horse all saddled and ready to go. Usually seen standing by a pond, and somebody comes along. Sometimes it'll be a beautiful woman, and either way they'll be enticed into the pond, where then they're drowned and eaten or changed themselves, whichever. But it's, again, when you take these legends that people are still using and telling, and then take them, or even the Native American culture stories, which are very, very much alive in tribal life today. They're not something that's gone away and forgotten. The people have been very diligently working at retaining their language and bringing back some of these stories. So it's very much happening in contemporaneous times, but when you look back, it's the thing that's been going on since forever.
Right. And I can't help but draw the kind of the almost a triangle maybe with the witchy wolves, and how both wolves and witches were hunted to almost extinction back a couple hundred years ago. But now the Native Americans are also in that category. So it just, I don't know, it kind of draws a parallel for me for some reason.
Yeah, the witchy wolves is a story I've been fascinated with for years. And that is something that I've just had to really dig and wait and be patient and meet people to get more of it out, because what was originally known of it was they were supposed to be spirit wolves that were left long ago by Native Americans to guard their sacred place. And so when teenagers would come out and use it for necking parties, then all these witchy wolves would come out into the field. They'd be howling. You could hear them howling through the pines, and it was extremely frightening.
I'm sure.
But there wasn't all there was to it. I learned I was up there giving a talk to their historical society. Was able to meet some of the members, and they had saved some documents that had been stored at the historical society that were written by a local quote-unquote historian. And I think sometimes people who have a trickster nature will hide truth in tomfoolery and jokes and things. And I think that's kind of how these were, because they described something that happened back around the Civil War, where one of the young men from the town had gone off to war and came back with his remains able to be contained in a shoebox. And it said he had died from this condition called scorbutus or scorbutus. It could be pronounced either way. And the people in the town didn't really know what that was. They buried him, dug a hole, and buried him what best they could. And then they were going to do a better job in the spring when things unfroze. They went out there one day in the spring to help bury him more properly and to clean the cemetery. They had a little started cemetery out there to clean the cemetery. And when they started digging, they heard this growling, and there was a big she-wolf that was denning in this place where they had buried the remains of this person, their son that had come back. And then there were other growls in the forest, as if she were calling forth helpers. And they took their shovels and spades and beat a hasty retreat back to town.
Good idea.
Mm-hmm, yes.
Exactly. But what I went and started researching, and the names that were given for these people all existed in the town's history. And one would be listed as an undertaker, and it would turn out, sure enough, he was the undertaker. And
oh, wow.
It had them playing roles, and I verified that these people with this name did have a son that was killed and imprisoned in, I think he may have even been in Andersonville. It was one of the southern prisons.
Yeah, it was Andersonville, yeah.
Oh, wow.
And the scorbutus or scorbutus, whichever way you want to pronounce it, was another word for scurvy. They didn't have proper food. They didn't have vitamin C. And so many of them died of scurvy in those camps, just like the old-time sailors before they realized they needed a vitamin C source on their long trips. So all those names were real, and the actual thing that happened to the young soldier was real.
Wow.
And then they brought these forth and forward to the present day, where there were the necking teenagers, and then they heard noises, and the boys went out of the car and went missing. The girls were managed to get back to town, and then the young men never were found, but somebody did find a belt buckle with one of their initials on it. Out of And again, there are real names used, but I could not find any confirmation that these missing young men were indeed missing. So I really feel that these were sort of a where's Waldo sort of form of
Right.
Yeah.
I bet that's so exciting, though. It's like all of a sudden when you start, looking into some of the history of some of these stories, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, there he is. There's the family. There's the young man that died, and that part of it is exciting. And then, of
It
course,
is.
then you get the young men. It's like, darn it, where are
Yeah.
these young men?
And they may, who knows, they may be found one of these days. To me, all of these things are really fun and exciting. My first taste of it was when I was working for the newspaper, and we were living in the kennel near the Lauderdale Lakes, and one of the weed skimmers that they had, that they go putt-putts around the lake and gathers up the seaweed that's lying on the surface, happened to come across something very old and heavy, and it happened to be the seat from a World War II era fighter jet plane. It was an ejection seat.
Oh, wow.
And nobody knew where it possibly came from. And I did some real due diligence and found out that there was a crash, an airplane crash not too far away, and that the pilot was able to eject himself safely and walk to a nearby residence and was saved from the whole ordeal.
Wow.
And the whole of it got reprinted in one of the military magazines that follows discoveries of war artifacts. So that was kind of cool. And that kind of set me off. And I think that was one thing that gave me the confidence to think maybe I could, just find enough facts on the Beast of Bray Road or these other creatures or the other legends that perhaps something could be ascertained. And there aren't many. We did have the famed Gable film, which was intended as a hoax, believed by some, and then turned around so that it was supposed to be the truth, and other people were causing a hoax. So, it can make your head spin just the way these, incidents do, faster probably even.
I was just wondering about that too. What was the spark that got you to write your first book? I mean, what was the spark that just was like, oh, I know I guess, I'm just saying that, was there something that people kept telling you, you need to write this down, you need to write a book? Did you just always want to, start writing books, or did it just come to you one day and thought, I'm going to start writing these stories down? And
It was probably that police file
Well,
on the werewolves, labeled werewolves.
That was a big thing. But, I remember back in fifth grade telling my fifth grade teacher that she asked me what I wanted to be, when I grew up. And I said, well, I want to write my own books and illustrate them. And she looked at me, she kind of clucked and she said, oh, Linda, you can do better than that.
Oh my gosh.
What?
Oh, well, yes.
I could still see her face saying that. And I thought to myself, well, I don't think so. I think, that's what I was supposed to do. And the thing was, I physically, literally could not conceive of writing any sort of book length article until we had word processing.
Oh, I bet.
When
Yeah.
those word processors came out, and they were still being used when I was first hired for the newspaper in 91, 92. It was just great because you didn't have to use whiteout. You didn't have to get that terrible erasing paper, and you just fix anything you wanted. That was a big game changer.
Yes, that was the Wang word processor.
Yeah.
That's what I started on. Yes.
Yeah, and then we had those little tiny, the first computers. Really, they were, and I'm trying to think what they were called, but they were the old ancient things that we had to work on that newspaper. But yet, it was fine with me because you could change things, interchange things, move them around.
Right.
That was what I needed. And by the time I worked for that newspaper for 10 years, and by the time I was done, things had just progressed. I had my own electric typewriter. That was what we called it then. And my own little kind of minute, well, though I guess they were actually, in a way, the insides were minute, but the outsides were huge compared to today's desktops and things like that. But it was enough. And I actually was more tortured about writing my first book because it was true historical crime. And I had published a lot of it in the newspaper in installments. And over the 10 years at that paper, I had written 2 stories where every single paper for the Sunday edition was sold out. One was The Beast of Bray Road, and the other one was this one called The Poison Widow, which was about a true story about a Whitewater, Wisconsin woman who killed her husband. She had a teenage, he wasn't teenage anymore, he was in his 20s, student boarding at her house, and they began to have an affair. This is, again, I remind you, in the early 1920s, and they killed, between the two of them, they murdered her husband with strychnine and would have gotten away with it, except then she tried to kill her 4 lovely children as well.
Wow.
And it went like Keystone Cops from that point. And I finished the story with what I had available, and then I thought, well, what happened to her? Where'd she ever go? And I discovered that she wrangled her way out of prison. She was eventually
my gosh,
sent to prison, where she was made the head cook for the women's part of it. No lie. And
oh my God,
catering for the prison wardens' parties and things. And she got a pardon from the governor. And this is after she had confessed, and it was all pretty well understood.
Oh my gosh.
And then she went to Illinois and had a second family that never knew anything about her until I showed up at the door one day with news clippings and pictures of her. And
wow.
I basically said, I know what your granny did last century.
Oh my gosh.
And I love the pop culture reference there.
I was terrified to go there because I didn't know who these people were. I thought maybe they were a gang of, thugs, or who knew. And it was this lovely lady who was the woman's Myrtle's step-granddaughter and her mother. And they said they wouldn't have believed me if I hadn't had the newspaper clippings. They had to go, yep, that's her, that's her.
Wow. It almost makes me think of the musical Chicago with Roxy.
Yeah.
Whatever happened to her when she got old after she murdered?
He had it coming, dun, dun, dun.
Yes,
He had it coming, dun, dun, dun. So, Linda, for the fans, because this is an amazing story, what was the name of it so I can put a link to it in the chat?
Sure. It's called The Poison Widow, A True Story of Sin, Strychnine, and Murder.
Okay. I'm definitely going to have to read that. That sounds really good.
And that was 2003. You couldn't make that stuff up. You just couldn't. I'll give you another little tip. This is really my favorite part. When I was talking to that family, they kept looking at each other. And finally the mother said, first she said, I never liked that woman. And then she said, and then what really got her was she said she was cooking. That was her main deal. She cooked for the family. They owned a drapery sewing mini company, and she was the cook, so they could just keep working. And she said she would watch them when they ate their food that she had cooked them. She'd watch them and she'd say, "Is it good? Is it good?"
Oh my gosh.
If that doesn't show your blood, nothing will.
Yeah.
That's scarier than 10 dogmen.
So I mean, since we're on the subject of true crime and everything, you got something else true crime related coming or on the writing roadmap there, Linda?
Not really, unless there's something I mentioned and forgot since, which is eminently possible.
Okay.
Did you ask that question for a reason?
I'm just usually I ask about next projects, but usually
Oh.
later in the show and everything. But
Okay.
since we're on the subject, why not?
Yeah, well, my next project will probably be, my agent's been kind of suggesting that I do this for some years. Because the first question almost everybody asks me is, how did a nice Lutheran, Wisconsin girl like you end up doing this stuff?
Yes.
So he'd like me to write kind of my business memoir, of
Okay. Yeah.
how I went through it all and things that happened.
Yeah. So I was going to ask about your writing process. So with all the authors that come on, I'm always like, well, how do you get your ideas? How you flesh them out? How do you go through the veracity procedure? Because I mean, you write nonfiction, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of fact checking, and some things make it in and don't. So how do you go about deciding what you're going to write next?
That's a good question.
Yeah, it is. Generally, I have some idea, and the memoir thing, I've been kind of writing in my head. I'm making preliminary forays into some historical things I need to find. But it just, it's hard for me to answer that, because truly most of it comes to me. People write me, they're wonderful. Other authors say, oh, I was going through this and I found this tidbit that seemed more appropriate for you. Maybe you'll like it.
Oh, that's
and then,
nice.
And that's usually the start. And then that's when I can just dig in my claws and go, library hopping and internet surfing and interviewing people, whatever I need to do. For The Poison Widow, I had between 500 and 600 pages of court documents.
Wow.
From her trials. Yeah, I had to track them down in the state archives and sent to Whitewater, to the university there, and read them with the white gloves. I couldn't take them out of the building or anything. I copied most of them.
Wow.
And that was interesting because there were love letters between her and the young lover. And
oh my gosh.
They were, I guess we would use the word lewd today to describe most of them. I don't go any farther than that. But I was embarrassed. I didn't know people talked like that back in the 1920s. But they became an appendage to the back of the story. And then I just kind of, I guess I would call it organically. Whatever seems necessary and interesting, I move toward that, see if I can find somebody to interview, any kind of living records, archives. A couple of the witnesses that I interviewed, again, I seem to have these weird personal connections with stories that originally are topics I would never have thought I had one with. But just to name two for this one, I have to tell you real quickly, the way that she wanted to kill the 4 children while her lover was hiding out in a farm in Minnesota was the strychnine again, since she knew how. And so she practiced on rats in her basement with different amounts of strychnine to make sure she would have enough. She went downtown. She went to 2 different stores, and in one she bought these giant chocolate bonbons with fillings. And at the other place she bought a bunch of strychnine. And she was, by then, she had bought another house and was feeding young women who were there at the teaching normal school. At the time, they'd come across the street for meals with her all the time. And she needed potatoes, so she sent her 4 children in her car out in the country to get potatoes. Only I take that back. It wasn't her car. It was the neighbor's car, because she didn't want her car to get wrecked. Her plan was that they would drive out into the country with her 16-year-old at the wheel and then a 13-year-old in the front seat. And then she had a girl who was probably 6 and a boy who was probably 4. And they were going to have this fabulous outing. And the little neighbor girl asked if she could go along. And Myrtle said no, she couldn't go. So how do I know this detail? Because the little neighbor girl happened to live next door to me in Elkhorn.
Wow.
Of all the people in the
What
world.
a coincidence.
And she was fairly elderly by then, but she got her Sunday paper with that story, and she came running across the lawn saying, "I was there. I was the little girl. That was
Oh
me."
my
And
gosh.
she told me the whole thing. And then I won't give you all the details, but she eventually, things went wrong. They went very wrong very quickly. And soon she found herself talking to the district attorney, whose last name was Godfrey because he was a relation to my husband.
Oh, wow.
He was the one that broke the story.
Oh, wow.
So, how often does that stuff happen? But those kinds of things always give me a shiver. They make me feel like it was a confirmation that yes, I was supposed to write this story.
It was meant to be.
Yeah.
Right.
That's so cool. I can't
And-
wait to read it now.
Yeah, so I've ordered it, June, so I'll hand you my copy when I'm done with it.
I'll probably get my own.
I did order it. I had got my confirmed order shipping date arriving between right here. But so, Linda, let's just talk about Wisconsin weirdness. So, my home state and where you currently live, let's be real, we've got crazy stuff that happens there. We've got lake monsters, we've got canids, we've got Bigfoot, we've got serial killers. What is up with our home state? Let's be
We're
real
going to drink the
here.
water when we visit there,
I
Wendy.
know.
But it's fresh spring water.
That's true.
That's true.
That's true. You can get straight out of the well. It's going to be good.
Yeah, and that's where the monsters come from, according to the American friends, are the fresh springs.
Oh,
Mm.
nice.
So, yeah. But I always kind of jokingly say it's probably the long, dark winters
Mm-hmm.
that we have, and maybe that's part of it. I do think there's sort of an adventuresome pioneer spirit. That sounds corny, but
Mm-hmm.
so many, Wisconsin is said to have been one of the best melting pots for immigrants and people from different ethnic cultures of any in the United States. We just had every ethnicity here. And that, I think that you then get a great boost in just the spirit of the place.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many traditions, and one is enriched by the other. And for instance, I don't know if you knew this about Hillsborough, but it's one of the biggest melting pot of the melting pots. They had a huge Czech and Slovak population, which now has turned into one of the two. There's another town. Well, Phillips, my dad's hometown, builds itself also as the Czech capital, and they kind of duke it out for festival time in the summer. But so they got the Czechs, they got the Slovaks, they had a very large German population. They had Native Americans that managed to stay there. They had an African American population that was not there from. They weren't like on the trail,
Yeah, the Underground Railroad and stuff.
Right.
They were part of the Underground Railroad. They were freedmen who were just actually making their way north to Canada, just to go somewhere else, I think before all that. And they happened to find this area that they liked, and they stayed for quite a long time. And there are relatives, with their last name. And in fact, I was talking at a Bigfoot conference a few months ago, and we had a dinner for just to sit down after the thing was over, where the speakers and their spouses, whoever came along. And one of the spouses was a relative of, or a descendant of, some of the people from that particular colony. Wow. And she had the same last name, which was just incredible, because they had since, gone on, and I think some of them actually made it to Canada. Some stayed, and just kind of, fit into the surrounding area. But we had all of these. There were Irish, there were English. It was just a big stew pot, which I use in my present book as kind of a sign that this is what happened. Just as the humans emigrated here, we have a big melting pot of all these wild creatures that used to be here and are coming home to it. So yeah,
Yeah, I was going to say with our home state, like Milwaukee, how did Wisconsin get good beer? Because everyone left Germany and the Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia, and went to Milwaukee.
So true. You
Or
didn't
near,
think
or
about
near.
that.
Yeah,
That's yeah.
and then
Funny.
when I grew up in the North, I grew up with tales of Paul Bunyan, the lumberjack tall tales, so the hodag, Wendigo, and we had this big fusion between Scandinavian lore and the Native Americans up there. Like we have the Menominee tribe, we have a lot of Chippewa as well, and it all kind of flowed together as well. So yeah, the state, you're right, is like this microcosm of everything. And then from also a historic standpoint, Wisconsin was one of the, if not the only state for the longest time, that if you were African American and you made it to Wisconsin, no one could take you back.
Right.
Others,
Exactly.
Wow.
yeah, other states like neighboring Illinois to the south, someone could come up from Tennessee and say, "Hey, it's
They had a return agreement, and
Yeah.
I think they can get money for it. Yeah. Yeah.
not
Oh,
Wisconsin. If
so
if you made it to Wisconsin, no worries."
It's exactly right. Yeah, and that's what they had there. So I think that engenders vitality, a great amount of
Right.
exuberant vitality, and people they learn to get along, which is a beautiful thing.
Cool.
Yeah, and so Linda, on the subject of lumberjack tall tales, have you ever thought about exploring that topic about, we've got the hodag, which, was the hoax from the 1890s, but with some of those lumberjack tall tales, have you thought about developing them a bit more in any upcoming books? I'm just hint, 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 nudge, 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 wink, wink, wink.
Well, I haven't too much because I kind of went into, let's see, which book was it for? It might have been for American Monsters.
Okay, let me grab it.
Where I did I think that's the one where I did kind of go into that, and I'm hoping it wasn't Monsters Among Us. I forget what's in what book after a while, but it became sort of apparent to me if you look at the history of how Paul Bunyan grew from this originally kind of little story, newspaper stories that then expanded, and finally they were put together in a volume for school children that was to
Right.
you can see growth where they're sort of like older urban legends. They're you can see where they grow out of the culture and out of that lumber environment where these men they were out in the cold bare woods with, if you're from up north, there's trees and trees and trees and trees. Of course, until they did cut them all down almost. I mean, a lot of the north was clear cut, sadly. And then the lumber industry kind of died out for a while. Now it's back, but it's changed to more renewable trees and things.
Right.
And I will mention that in the meantime, they were selling rock farms to the immigrants, like my great grandparents who bought a rock. You know what a rock farm is? They essentially, the fields are full of rocks, and these people were hardy enough and stubborn enough that they stuck and stayed there and made that their home.
Wow.
Yeah, and they had to be Scandinavians because, I mean, you couldn't plow anything in Norway without hitting a rock.
That's true.
Yeah, but I think that most people don't realize in the northern part of the state, it's very hilly and it's a swamp. Go figure. You've got the contrasting geography.
The tamarack swamps. Oh,
Yeah.
I remember walking. There was a lake right near the cottage that was part of the farm that my dad's family came from, outside of Phillips. And my dad would grab us out of bed at 4:00 when it was still pretty close to dark, and we'd have to go walking around the edges of these tamarack bogs and only step where he stepped, or else you'd go sinking into the fishing place. And then there were bears out there sometimes between us and the house. And
my gosh,
I still have bear phobia to this.
I bet you do. Oh my gosh.
So, on the subject still of Wisconsin, let's you like to write about haunchies.
They're enjoyable to write about, yes.
Yeah, and I was going to say,
Now, what is a honchi?
yeah,
Sorry.
Well, I don't know where the name came from.
Okay.
I've never found that. Unless it's like, the best I could do was, because it refers to these people very small in stature who supposedly once worked for circuses, but now they retired. They want a little community village where the houses are their size. It's along a road called Mystic Lane on the shores of a lake near Milwaukee. And the story is that if you go looking and you get too close for their little community, first there's a man on a black pickup truck that will come with a rifle and try and shoot you.
Wow.
And get away from them, and you're still trying to get to them, then the little people will come with their spades and their whatever they have, garden tools, farming tools, and try and get you with those.
Oh my gosh.
So that, and I've always thought, well, it's kind of like they're sitting on their haunches in the corn waiting for you to come close enough that they can get you. That's the closest I've come. But there are other really similar colonies talked about in the Weird U.S. books. There's one in New Jersey where there are actual little dwelling places that look like complete homes, but they're too small for the person of average height by far. And there's another one in Florida. And the thing that all of these have in common is they actually are located near winter quarters for some of the famous circuses. So there were circuses that were wintered there. I know there one in Wisconsin was near a different lake, Delavan.
Yep.
And if you're probably familiar with that as a Wisconsinite. And yeah, there were several circus families that owned this, what's now a resort area. And that is, no way, I'm losing my entire train of thought. where was I going? I think about this resort area and my head starts popping because there were also giants found in burial mounds on that exact same property.
Oh my.
But it was known as the circus town. They still have a giant giraffe and a clown and an elephant, giant fiberglass statues on the town square in Delavan. And there were people that were supposed to have formed a secret colony on that lake shore in a place that, I was not told by the person who divulged this to me. But she said they were friends of her parents and they would go visit sometimes. And there was a fur-covered lady they just called Auntie who made the best cookies and would serve the cookies. So to me, it's like part urban legend, the part about them running out of the cornfields. And there was more to that, the man who snooped too much and became a shadow hanging by a noose inside a barn. And of course, the black pickup truck. Those are very urban-like legends. And maybe not even legends. It's hard to say exactly what they are. But the fact that there were people of small stature, they had to go somewhere when the circuses closed.
Right.
Some owned property near the circus winter quarters in all these different locations. And that part makes total sense.
Wow.
And it seems like I read an article that they had found a colony like that, or they had found bones and things of small people under a university, and I forget which one now, darn it. But that it happened all over the place, that there were those kind of places found all over the United States, and they just didn't get talked about and covered up all the time. And I don't know that they were dwarves or people who suffered from dwarfism as much as just the little people. I don't know, maybe something akin to a leprechaun or something.
Yeah, and I do think there's a distinction between the leprechaun, gnome-like little people and what we really should be calling small humans.
Right.
True. Yeah.
It's a very big divide between them. And I think that, we have these small humans we call the hobbits, or Florensis. I can't remember how that goes anytime we say it. The Florensis island, and so they were called Florensis. I'm close to it.
Yeah.
But the point is that they were alone on this island in very small stature, and yet they were complete humans. They looked a little different when you got looking at the later photographs of the skeletons. It seemed like they had a little smaller heads or something, which would be the opposite of how those things are usually portrayed.
Hmm.
But there are other things called little people. For instance, up by Superior, you have that, I think it's called the Bad Axe Nation, Reserve Nation.
Yep, the tribe, yeah.
And they have what they call little people, which scientists today call concretions. They're often just perfect little spherical I don't know, they're not representations because they're supposedly formed by nature. Um, it seems like they're made of concrete, but not the kind of industrial concrete we use. It's just a natural mineral formation. And they end up being in these little balls. Sometimes they're lumped together. There was a man who had over 1,000 of them and put up what he called a concretion museum.
Oh my.
This is in, I believe, Weird Wisconsin. Don't stake me to it because it may be in Strange. I think it's in the Weird Wisconsin book, though. And I have one of them, actually. But their legend is that little spirits live inside each of these.
Oh.
And so they call these concretions little people.
Interesting.
Yeah, well, on the subject of little people, in your I Know What I Saw, Chapter 7, Hidden Little People, you talk about the Chilean cave creatures, which were golem-like. So,
Sing my precious, my precious.
and the questions I have around that one is, it seems the description of these, do we call them cave dwellers? I guess that's would be appropriate. Do you find that with these little people in caves, would they be considered the same species? And if so, is there some kind of interconnected cave network that ranges North America down to South America? I mean, we are connected.
Yeah, they're traveling around safely, so we don't see them.
Exactly. I do believe that there are more underground and connected cave facilities in the earth than anybody has realized. And there have been announcements just very, very recently of finding some of these open areas and cave areas that were never suspected before. Even if you just take the number of openings and caves and passageways under a city of almost any size, especially in the northern states where they were used to get around in winter. They were put in, many of them for subways, many of them for room to run these steam-heated giant buildings that came up in the industrial age. So our cities are honeycombed with them. We know that they occur in the bottoms of all kinds of freshwater and saltwater lakes, seas, oceans, whatever you want to call them. I think there are more of those, and there's more of an effect that they have than anybody realizes, and that they may very well harbor pale skin. Anything that lives in a place with a lack of light will end up pale skinned.
Mhm.
Some of them blind, And there's a photo that this man, who's kind of a professional adventurer, took, that's in the book. I wouldn't, you can't swear for sure that that's what this is, but he seemed to have no other explanation for it. Sometimes there are photographic effects if the sun is shining in the right way, that you can take a photo of a human figure from a distance and it will look sort of pared in at the neck and display some of these same features. But I decided to allow him the benefit of the doubt because his story was so compelling. And before he took that photo, that's when he had gone on a trip to Chile with some other spelunking friends, and found they were followed by these golem type things that they just spot them every once in a while, and it was like they were being spied out for their food storage, or they didn't know what would happen if they stayed in there for a long time.
Yeah, so that makes me wonder, because there are primates in Latin America, and if it was a cave-dwelling primate. I mean, like in Panama for sure, in Costa Rica, they do have their monkeys, and it makes me wonder if there is a cave-dwelling species we don't know about yet that would reflect, like a pale skin and hairless and
It would
Like the movie The Descent.
yeah. Well,
Ooh.
those were really big
Yeah, I was like, oh yeah,
humanoids
those were not
there
small,
with very
small,
sharp teeth.
creatures. Ooh. That's why I don't go into caves these days.
I get claustrophobia.
Yeah, me too.
I don't know how people lived. I actually know a man. It's passed, but he had a sister. They were both from France, and the sister lived in an actual cave in France. And the only thing she had to do was the government required her to put in electricity. So she had to put in electricity, but other than that, she wasn't. They were both artists, and she lived in this cave and made artwork. I never found out what happened to her.
Was it kind of part of the catacombs, or was it just like a cave in the countryside?
Yeah, it was just like a cave in the countryside.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, Linda, since we're getting time, I have to talk about your TV show appearances because I watch all the paranormal TV shows.
Same here. Yep. Join the club.
I do love all of them. Like, I watch all of them. But so earlier this year, on In Search of Monsters, as well as Legend Hunter, they both had episodes about the Beast of Bray Road. So could you tell us a little bit about your involvement, and who do you think got it right about exploring the origins of the Beast of Bray Road?
Yes.
Well, they were all pretty decent productions, and there was also, like I think I mentioned earlier, the Seth Breedlove's Small Town Monsters offering, which was really one of the best. He did very well. Ones that were problematic, there was one that at the end of it, and this actually may have been a different one that was a little bit before. There have been almost 5, I think, in total. And this one, at the very end, they did very well to the very end, and then just as sort of an afterthought, threw in this idea that 5 horses were slaughtered by cutting their throats on Bray Road. And to the best of anyone's knowledge, that never happened. And I went and checked with the I was like, what? That happened?
Yeah.
And I checked everything, and there was nothing to indicate that. I know people on that road who have some horses, they're the only ones. And, that they completely just poo-pooed it. There was another one that the people were in all of these, the people who put them on, they were delights to work with. They really were. And I enjoyed the filming. And they concluded that the Beast of Bray Road, this thing that looked like a canine with pointy ears on top of the head and walked upright on dog legs and was covered with shaggy dark brown fur, was actually a bear with mange. Even though we don't have breeding populations of bears in southeastern Wisconsin.
No, not at all.
And if there were mange, why did nobody report that? Why did everybody say it was completely covered with shaggy dark brown fur?
Yeah, because if it were and it would be a black bear, which even if it stands up, wouldn't be
It
as
can't run as
tall.
fast as a
Right.
dog.
Yeah, but it wouldn't
Exactly.
be. The Beast of Bray Road had a decent height, and a black bear is not. It's like 5 feet if it stands.
I was going to say 5 or 6 feet at the most. Yeah.
Right. And their body is proportioned so differently. Their center of gravity is much lower. Their hind legs are much lower. They walk and run flat-footed. They're plantigrade is the technical term for it. They're just so different. And to think that we might have a bear running hither and yon on Bray Road without leaving definite bear spoor of different sorts just doesn't, and you can't blame the actual host that they have doing it, because all of these shows are scripted and have to pass muster with the whoever the sponsor is, and it's kind of dictated. So, I don't hold it against them. But the last one that aired, I really thought was one of the best, And I'm thinking that was the legend.
Well, In Search of Monsters had the episode come out in May.
Okay, that would be it. In Search of Monsters. Yeah, that was it. I really think that they kind of took the prize
Yeah.
for all of them. Just in terms of cinematography and sticking truthfully to what happened, I have my little bone to pick with them too. It's not that much, except it's kind of the same for all of them. And actually, this goes back to the very first ones with Monster Quest, is that they're very reluctant to portray me out in the field doing the work that I do, because I'm out there quite a lot.
Right.
I've had various things happen in the cattle moraine while I've been out there. I've worked with this hay farmer for going on 5 years now, literally out in his hay fields, in my slushy rubber boots, trying to pose where we thought a Bigfoot showed up in one of his trail cams to compare the height and the weight. Kind of, I call it channeling my inner Bobo.
That's great.
And I mean, and doing my own thing in them. I'm really, if I am able to get to a place that's reported to me, I go there. And yet, they all showed me as the office lady.
Oh.
And I don't understand that. I think that's kind of disingenuous.
Right.
I think there are a lot of women who could be inspired to go out, and it's not men's work really. It's just being careful and investigating and educating yourself to what might or might not be there. Learning what you can and then going forth and doing it. And I mean, and I'm not even. People have the impression that from what they do here that I must be this big mighty mountain woman, and and I'm 5'1", and when I met one particular well-known investigator, he was at we were both at the same conference, and I thought, well, I'm just going to go over and say hi to him. I went over and said hi, and he looked at me, and I said, I'm Linda Godfrey. And his eyes got big. He literally fell out of his chair, fell sideways onto the floor. And he looked up at me and he said, I thought you'd be enormous.
So funny. You're like, well, thank you.
I've heard those things before. I'm almost 5 foot tall.
Yeah. So see, I may be a hobbit, but I can still go. Right. And I do, And I'll tell you real quickly too, the very first Monster Quest, when they came to my house to film me, the idea was, and they stated this, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to show you vacuuming, making a bed, and then you're going to get a phone call, and then you're going to run off to go and look for this beast. And I said, you can film me with a vacuum cleaner when you can pry my cold dead fingers from around the wand of the vacuum cleaner. I wouldn't do that. I just wouldn't. So that's an area where they all can show some improvement.
I am surprised. I mean, you were a journalist, so
yeah,
you go out in the field, interview, you lift rocks, you.
I parachuted. I actually skydived.
Yeah.
Oh my.
I chased these rheas around in a frozen pen. It was like 10 below zero. I did all that. In fact, they jokingly called me the adventure reporter when I worked for that newspaper, because I tested out personal water vehicles on the
wow.
Geneva Lake, and did the parasailing and you name it. I loved doing all that stuff for these stories, but yet somehow it has to be the big guy in camo that goes out in the woods. And I have good male friends who are great big guys in camos, and I love them all dearly, and they're great guys to go out with. But I guess I'm just asking for the same status, and not just for me, for other women.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, totally agree. We're getting close to time, but I do have one more question for you, Linda. And that is, you are so well known for canids, werewolves, and dogmen. If you could research and write about any other cryptid or creature, be it avian, big cat, UFOs, more about Bigfoot, lake monsters, what would it be, and why would you want to pursue it?
Well, I would probably have to say Bigfoot, because the reports of Bigfoot in the Kettle Moraine started coming to me way back at 91, 92, as soon as the reports of the upright dog man did. So I knew right away, just from the number of the reports and their nature, that they were seeing something that appeared to be Bigfoot. I couldn't describe it any other way. And then eventually I had to wait 20 years, but I did have my own experiences. And I'm still coming to grips with that because it's not the same as studying other people seeing them at all. It's a very, very different proposition. So I'm sort of under the thrall of the Bigfoot, I guess I would have to say right now, because that, when you have that kind of experience, it started with a giant branch being ripped off a living oak tree right in front of me. You can go to lindagodfrey.com, type in Bigfoot branch in the search box, and see the photos of this 35-foot long, 8-inch diameter piece of living oak tree that I couldn't have been more than 150 feet from it, something like that. And it tells the whole story there, so I won't go into it. But I'm pretty much hung up on Bigfoot. And of course, right now, these black mystery panthers, as they're called, I've had 2 different people with Native American associations tell me that these, not the tan cougars, but the black ones, are spirit creatures. So I'm trying to pursue that as well.
Yeah, we didn't get into that. And for our listeners, when you buy I Know What I Saw, you can go to Chapter 10, Black Mystery Cats and Inconvenient Mountain Lions, to read more about that. It would be classified, it's water panthers, I believe, is the section of that chapter that covers it.
That's what they were called, or something like that.
Oh, Linda, we're definitely going to have you on again. You're just so fascinating. I love hearing your stories.
You guys ask great questions, and that's part of it. It really, really is. I enjoyed my time here with you.
Okay.
So pleasure as always, yes.
As always, and we're huge fans, so really we'll bump anyone for you.
That's great.
I make the website, I'll bump anyone for you. So we've got about a minute and a half left. So I do want to say, Linda S. Godfrey, her new book, I Know What I Saw, Modern Day Encounters with Monsters and New Urban Legend and Ancient Lore. It comes out on July 16th. You can pre-order on Amazon, get it in paperback as well as Amazon. It is published by Tarcher Peregree, a Penguin Random House imprint. Amazing book. We got a pre-read. As you can tell, we were listening off the chapters and everything. It's like one of my favorite books. It's right up there with my absolute favorite is Real Wolfman. And tune in next week. We will have on, Wendy, correct me if I'm wrong, Jason Kupsik. Is that how you pronounce his name?
That's how I've been pronouncing it. If it's wrong, he can correct me next week. Yeah.
And he's a very influential paranormal investigator in the Kansas City area, and I believe he's behind a Paracon that you'll be having.
Yes, he's behind the Kansas City Paracon, August 9th and August 10th.
Yeah, which sounds like it's going to be really, really cool.
Yes,
really nice Paracon.
And I'll be there too, so come down and see us if you're around.
Yay!
And Linda, again, your Facebook group, though it's private, is
Unknown Creatures Spot.
Right, Unknown Creatures Spot, and you can just request to be in it. We just ask a simple question to make sure you're not a spam bot.
Yes,
bot. Then you can be ushered in. So just go to Unknown Creatures Spot. We have a real great group. Lots of interesting people in there.
And
wonderful.
Your website is lindagodfrey.com, and as well you have Linda S. Godfrey. If you search Facebook, you can find her Linda Godfrey author page to see what she's working on currently as well.
Right, and also please, if you would, go to Facebook, Return to Wildcat Mountain, or on YouTube, Return to Wildcat Mountain. And if you like it, give us a like. That would be great. Or subscribe, even better.
Absolutely.
Now,
was there an upcoming date for when the documentary will be out?
We're looking at mid-September right now.
Okay.
So we're not giving a hard and fast date, but we're probably we're coming into the ending of the post production, and
Oh, fantastic.
lots of wild stuff. And my son is a very talented cinematographer. He went to the school, graduated from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago
Oh, okay.
in film. So I'm really proud of the job that he's doing with it. And that how that whole thing came about is probably another show. But
We can have you back for that in September.
Definitely, yes.
Absolutely.
great, that would be great.
That's a
And-
good idea.
And also, the gentleman who started writing me about it and actually collected all of these from these people, just on his own say so, I think he would be fascinating to have.
Okay. Maybe we can
Oh, sure.
Do a
Bring you
double-
all on.
Yeah,
Mhm.
have you all on to talk about the movie, and we can
Great
take it
show.
frame by frame.
That'd be perfect.
Mhm.
Frame by frame.
Because
I
I want to go into
Yes.
detail like that. I'm really nerdy.
Yes.
That's amazing, Jacob. That's why we love you.
So Wendy, June, closing words.
Well,
It's been great. Thank you
yes.
so much for being with us tonight, Linda.
Thank you. That's been just so fascinating. I've enjoyed hearing everything. It's just been wonderful.
And thanks to all your listeners from me very much. I appreciate anybody who takes the time to listen to 2 words of me. I'm
That's amazing.
Well, and if you buy the books, go and leave a review for goodness sakes, or at least
Yes.
give it stars or whatever, and just short, honest, whatever you got. Please be nice and polite. Although there's always going to be trolls.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Amazon does a great job of filtering out the trolls now.
that's nice.
Very good.
Um,
Alrighty then.
Yeah, we would like to thank our sponsor, Carly, from Crimson Cloak Publishing and the Crimson
Thank
Cloak
you,
Radio
Carly.
Network. Thank you for letting us invade your space.
Yes.
And as we close out, we have the song Wolves at the Door. It's by Bad Seed Rising.
Yes.
So,
Nice.
Thank
All right.
you.
Everybody have a great week.
Yes.
Bye.
Thank you for listening, and take care.
Thank you.